And then the market shifts and they don't adapt. And all of a sudden, they're not the top agent. They're not the top fixer and flipper. And if we don't adapt to the market, that could be any one of us. We had the explosion in our business right when the market shifted, but nobody else was shifting with it. When you get into a period of time where there has been no change for a while, everyone kind of operates as though there will be no changes. Welcome, everybody, to Agent Investor. I'm your host, Tom Caffarella. At Agent Investor, we help real estate agents get off the real estate roller coaster by helping agents follow what we call the Agent Investor model. The Agent Investor model focuses on real estate agents getting listings, getting seller appointments, making cash offers, and it's a 3-step process. Step number 1, keep selling real estate, keep doing everything that you're doing to earn a living, but focus a little bit more on sellers. Step number 2, when you're getting these seller appointments or listing appointments or cash offer appointments every week, make some cash offers, right? Give your seller the option to take a cash offer, to compare. And if they do take that cash offer, either you fix and flip that property or partner with us and my team. We'll put up all the money, we'll do all the construction, and we'll split the profits 50-50. The reason that you want to do that, right? The reason that you want to focus on sellers is not only to get more listings, but to get these flip opportunities, to get big hits of income, big chunks of income. The average fix and flip profit that we've partnered with real estate agents all over New England and even further than New England is $80,000. So imagine looking for sellers, looking for people selling their house, which is what real estate agents should do anyways. Finding a deal, having us put up all the money, do all the construction, and then getting a check a few months later for 40 or 50 grand. Because then step number 3 that we practice ourselves and we preach is to invest those big chunks of income into long-term assets that are going to pay you forever. That is what we call the agent investor model. That's what we teach on. That's what we help agents do. We help agents get off the real estate roller coaster so that they no longer have to worry about whether or not they're going to earn a commission every single month. Like I always talk about, I got licensed in 2005, had kind of a good start to my real estate career. Year number 2, I kind of got smacked in the face, and I was always worried that I was going to have to go back to being an accountant, getting a full-time job. And it wasn't until I actually bumped into my first fix and flip deal on 13 Cameron Ave in Somerville, Massachusetts, where me and my partner made $115,000 on a seller appointment that I went to go list the property. So if you're here, if you're sick and tired of not knowing whether you're going to have a closing every single month, if you're worried that you're going to have to go out and get a job, if you want to have guaranteed monthly income, you've come to the right place. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about market shifts and how what market we're in impacts our success, particularly if we're not adjusting to what the current market environment is. Okay. Most of you have probably heard the book Shift by Gary Keller. It's a really good book. I'd recommend taking a look at that book as well. I'm going to talk about some of the concepts in it, but with my own spin and particularly a fix and flip business spin to it, a seller appointment spin to it. So really, like I said in the outset, at the end of the day, if we're real estate agents and we want to be successful agents, if we want to be successful agent investors, if we want to earn passive income, if we want to combine the two principles of being an agent and being an investor, the number one thing that we need to do is get seller. You could call them listing appointments, but I call them seller appointments because when we go on a seller appointment, we don't just give a seller the option to list their property. We also give them a cash offer, sell now for cash. Don't do anything to your property. Don't get it ready. Don't have to have open houses. And we kind of walk the seller through the pros and cons of both, listing their home the traditional way and selling cash direct to us. So if you want to stay in this business, you've probably heard the saying list to last. How do you get listings? Well, you need seller appointments. How do you get seller appointments? To me, the answer to that depends a little bit on what market you're in. The strategies that work to get listings and fix and flip deals, they're just not the same year in and year out. Yes, there is some stuff that I would call evergreen that, will, work, um, that will work forever, but there's strategies and techniques. And going back to when I started in real estate, 2005, I have seen a lot of different shifts. And I've also seen that this is the thing. If you've been in real estate long enough, you've seen these big names, these, signs in the ground, these agents that seem to have every listing. And over the years, that changes. And why does it change? One of the reasons it changes is because those agents are kind of doing one thing. They're focused on one thing. And then the market shifts and they don't adapt. And all of a sudden, they're not the top agent. They're not the top fixer and flipper. And if we don't adapt to the market, that could be any one of us. The great thing is that when the market shifts, most people, this isn't just in real estate, this is in the investment world, this is in a lot of areas of life. But when there's change, most people keep trying to do the same thing that they've always done. They used to work. If you've never read the book, Who Moved My Cheese? It's a really, really great book. It's a simple book. You can get it on Audible. You can get it kind of anywhere. And I'm going to give you the high level of it to help you kind of understand how this relates to shifts. So the book, Who Moved My Cheese? It's, an analogy for life and business and all that good stuff. But it's essentially like a mouse or a rat kind of in, a confined area. And every single day, it's like a maze, and they put the cheese in the same spot every single day. And of course, the mouse, every day when it wakes up, it wants to eat the cheese, and it knows exactly the path of where, the cheese is. But one day they move the cheese to a completely different area. And what they find, and this is true, again, it's the analogy of business and life here, is that a lot of times the mouse keeps going to the same spot every single day that they used to go to, but the cheese is no longer there, right? So that mouse, their life, whether they're going to continue living or not, is going to be based on whether or not they kind of try to look somewhere else for where that cheese is. If they keep going to the same spot that it's not there anymore, unfortunately, they're not going to have any food, right? It's the same thing with real estate agents. It's the same thing with a lot of areas of business. And we get comfortable, right? We get comfortable having success and doing things in a certain way. And especially if we've had success doing things a certain way, it gets really, really, really easy to keep going in the same spot looking for that cheese. But again, the reality is, and I've seen this over the 20 years I've been in real estate, a lot of times that cheese never goes back to where it was originally located. Okay. So I'm going to talk quickly about some of the different cycles I've experienced and how the cycle that we're in has impacted kind of like the strategies of, again, how do you get fix and flip deals? How do you get listings and all that good stuff? So I'm going to jump into kind of like 2005. That's when I got into the business. For those of you who were not in the business in 2005, the 2005, well, probably more like the 2003 to maybe the 2007 era, was the era of anybody getting a mortgage. I mean, legitimately, like I remember being 19 years old. I went in, I wanted to buy an investment property, and I sat with the lender. So I was 19. So what was this? I was born in 82. So this was like 2001, actually. So maybe that era was like 2001 to 2007. And I remember sitting with that mortgage broker. And they said to me, they said, "Hey, I know you don't make a lot of money, but they do this thing called stated income. And you just tell me what you make. And if you make enough and you have good credit, you'll get the loan." So I believe that this was really the only time, since mortgages have really, been a thing, that mortgages were that easy to get. And there's movies about this time frame, a lot of good movies, a lot of good books. But essentially during that era, as you would imagine, if anybody can get a loan for any reason, and they don't even have to have a job, what ends up happening to prices? Well, prices went way, way up during that time frame because really nobody really cared what they paid. A lot of people who shouldn't have gotten loans and shouldn't have gotten houses, they were buying properties that they shouldn't have, that they couldn't afford, and they were getting these loans. So during that time frame, there was a huge, you can imagine, again, a huge boom in the mortgage industry. You can imagine there was a huge boom in the purchase industry. And you can imagine that there was a huge boom getting listings, right? So, because during that time period, if you had a house, your property was like doubling within a few years. So, getting listings back then and even getting buyers and getting mortgages were super easy. I mean, you could call anybody essentially, hey, your property that you thought was worth 300,000 is now worth 700,000. Any interest in cashing out? And back then, because anybody could get a loan, the interesting thing was, at least in greater Boston, and I'm sure this was the case in a lot of areas of the country, rents were very cheap because not a lot of people rented because anybody could get a mortgage. So during that time period, when you were flipping houses, this was another kind of like crazy thing. We talk about in 2005, you have to get an off market property. You have to do it. Back during that time period, you could buy a property on the MLS. Prices were going up so fast that you could buy a property on the MLS, do a tiny bit of work to it, and sell it 6 months later and make a profit. I actually did this in 2005 to 2006. I bought a three-family property. I converted it into condos. I actually did some of the work myself, and then I sold it at a profit in 2006. And it was easy. It was so easy. So that was the environment then, right? Now, all of a sudden, of course, like this all ended at some point. It started to kind of get a little bit weaker in 2007. And then in 2008, the entire market imploded, right? And all of these properties whose values skyrocketed. Now, all of these mortgage companies were going out of business. All these financial institutions were going out of business. All of these insurance companies that back these loans were going out of business or were getting bailed out by the government. All of a sudden, all of these no doc, no verification, like I don't care who you are, if you have a pulse, you're going to get a property. All of that changed. Now, the drive up in prices there was solely based on anybody getting a mortgage. So what happened in 2008, all of a sudden, the cheese was moved. The cheese was moved because now every buyer had to be qualified. And in fact, they were kind of had to be like super qualified. They had to be more qualified than ever because all of these companies were losing a ton of money because of the way that they were doing business before. So what happened in 2008 started, people weren't making their payments. So if you kind of go back in time just a little bit to 2003, 4, 5, 6, people with no jobs or very little income were buying these expensive properties. And guess what? All of a sudden, the mortgage payments come due. They weren't making their payments. Now, I remember this time vividly because this was really when I started to personally have some success in real estate. The cheese was moved. No longer could you buy a property on the MLS, hold it for a few months, and make a profit. But something changed, and there was another opportunity, right? So this was again late 2008, beginning of 2009. All of these people now were upside down on their homes. They were late on their homes. There was foreclosures pending on their homes. And I can remember going into a property, a two-family, that had sold for $550,000 just a few years before. That person got 100% loan. They got all the 550 and have to put down $1. And they stopped paying the mortgage. They were basically living in this property, paying nothing. And all of a sudden now their property's worth like 300,000, but yet they owe 600,000. So I remember during this time period thinking there's got to be a way to sell these properties. There's got to be a way to flip these properties. And I wasn't really sure. I didn't really know what to do. Nobody else really had any ideas. So I kept, I research. I mean, anytime that the market changes, personally, I'm talking to as many people as I can, not just locally either, in different mastermind groups, friends that are having success. I'm looking up stuff on YouTube. I'm Googling stuff, trying to figure out like, what's the solution here? Because nobody had one. What was happening during that time period in '08 and beginning of '09 is a lot of realtors would go and show up and the seller would tell them, hey, I haven't been making my mortgage payments. I'm going to get foreclosed on. And the listing agents, a lot of times back in those days, would just try to list the property for more than what was owed, even though the person was upside down. Now, speaking on this in 2025, you might be thinking, well, yeah, I mean, shouldn't they just do a short sale? But let me tell you, those were not a thing back then. They pretty much didn't exist. They weren't happening. When you contacted a bank back then about a short sale, they didn't know what to do. They didn't have a plan. But long story short, in 2009, 2010, 2011, into about 2012, our company did tons of short sales. We did tons of short sales, some of which we were lucky enough to buy and flip, some of which, we just listed and made a commission. They were doing 6% commissions, which was awesome back then. And because we saw where the cheese was moved, and because everybody else was so slow to adapt, I can remember, literally doing a mailer to like, people that were behind in their mortgage, and I would get calls off the wall. It was crazy. And most of the people that I talked to wanted the same thing. They had met with other people and the other people didn't have a solution. Again, this sounds like, even as I'm talking about it right now, like I can't believe that most people didn't shift. They just didn't. They just kept trying to do the same things over and over again that they had done from 2001 to 2007. They just kept trying to do those same things and they weren't really working. Now, remember in the onset, I said that there were so many real estate agents that I knew, big names, had signs everywhere during that time period. All of a sudden, those real estate agents were going out, they were getting jobs. Their signs weren't out in the ground anymore because they didn't shift. They kept trying to do the same thing over and over again. We shifted. We shifted pretty early. And we shifted with a lot of success. And we also learned how to buy properties at auction. We also learned how to buy HUD homes, how to buy foreclosure properties, a lot of stuff that, you might hear me talk about today saying it doesn't work in 2025, but all of that stuff worked really, really well then. And that's really where we had an explosion in our business. We had the explosion in our business right when the market shifted, but nobody else was shifting with it. Because if you think about it, like in the who moved my cheese kind of analogy, when the cheese was when cheese is in a spot for a long time, eventually everybody kind of finds out about it. Everybody knows where to go, everybody knows where to get it, and everybody's there eating it, right? So there's not a lot of cheese to kind of go around. When the cheese gets moved, the people that go in the early onset of it, they get to eat a lot. Right? There's a lot of opportunity because most people are still going to the same spot that they've always gone to. Now, I'll never forget when the market shifted again. When short sales kind of stopped being a thing, and when foreclosure stopped kind of being a thing, and when properties, were a little bit easier to sell. This was like maybe 2012 to 2013. And at that point, I remember having an open house. It was in Malden, Massachusetts. It was a 2-family. And all of our flips back then, they'd obviously sell, but they weren't super easy to sell because there was tons of inventory. if you look back at MLS history, like number of properties that were on the market in '09, 10, 11, 12, you'd be blown away if you haven't looked at that data or hadn't lived through it. I mean, there were signs everywhere, right? It sounds funny to say if you haven't gone through that because there's seems like there's no listings, there's no sellers, there's a lot of bottleneck there because of where interest rates are. But in 2012, um, it started to be easier to sell these properties again. Now, all of a sudden, a lot of buyers who had credit problems or issues or whatever, there was a lot of job loss in, '08, '09, 2010. All of a sudden, these people were getting their jobs back. Interest rates went way down. Interest rates for mortgage rates, were in the threes or in the fours, or they were just, it felt like back then prices were low, mortgage rates were low, payments were low. Everybody could afford a house. I mean, obviously not everybody, but most people could afford a property then. Like if you had a reasonable job, you could go out, you could get a mortgage and whatnot. But the short sale stuff wasn't working anymore. The foreclosure stuff wasn't really working anymore. And I can remember um, at that period of time, I remember looking on, like, just as an example, HUDHomestore.com, where there's a lot of like HUD owned properties. We bought a lot of those in the heyday of '09, 10, 11, 12. I remember like that all it was felt like overnight, all of those properties went away. All those properties went away. And now we're like, oh geez, like what do? We can't buy on the MLS anymore. The market shifted, so we needed to kind of shift with it. At that period of time, and again, if for those of you who have done this, who have flipped and are in the market, um, direct to seller became a big thing. Generating your own seller appointments became a thing. And I can remember like doing a very small mailing campaign to a certain city, in greater Boston. And I remember getting a bunch of seller appointments and a bunch of deals. And I'm legitimately talking like it cost me like $50 for a seller appointment based off of that initial mailer. And I got multiple deals from that mailer. And I remember at the time, like we were teaching on this, I was coaching on this, and I was like, hey, this is like a great way to get properties. And this was like 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, even 18. And then that kind of like stopped working. Why? Why did that stuff kind of stop working? Like if you've done mailers recently, you'll notice it's really hard to get a deal via a mailer. One of the reasons why is because the cheese was moved. Now everybody does that, and it doesn't quite work as well as it used to, right? Like we still do mailers and we still do a lot of direct to seller marketing, but because a lot of people are chasing it, it doesn't kind of work the same way. And I'm kind of like, I'm going to fast forward through, a few more years to kind of just make it, a few more points. Um, then all of a sudden, right? Like we had talked about, there being like signs everywhere in '08, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then those signs started to kind of come down because a lot of people could afford homes and a lot of people were trading homes and interest rates were super low. Now, fast forward a bunch to 2020. I'm sorry, 2022. 2022, like we had been in an era of low interest rates for so long. So long. We had people getting high 2% mortgage rates, low 3% mortgage rates, 3.5% mortgage rates. And I remember in the period of like 17, 18, 19, and even 20, people would say, hey, there's no inventory. There's no inventory. And everybody, so this shifting stuff, it's interesting. When you get into a period of time where there has been no change for a while, everyone kind of operates as though there will be no changes. And in 2018, 19, 20, 21, everybody operated like mortgage rates would never go up. Like nobody thought, if you said to somebody in 2021, hey, interest rates are going to be at 7% next year, double, but legitimately, like nobody would have believed you. I said, no, that's impossible. Maybe they'll go up a little bit. Maybe they'll get to 4.5. I doubt they'll touch 5. That would have been kind of the thing. Then all of a sudden, inflation goes through the roof, right? A lot of money was printed during the COVID era.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, inflation's through the roof. Inflation hit over 10% year over year at some point, I think in 2022. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, interest rates are now 7%. There was a point where they almost hit 8%, a couple of weeks or a month or whatever it was. And now that's another big shift. Another that the cheese has been moved again. Why did that make a big difference? Well, we've got an enormous amount of sellers that are living in their home right now that want to sell, that have 3% interest rates, that cannot afford to move. They can't afford to move because even if they want to sell, even if they get a good price on their current home, they can't afford to then buy another property and pay a 7% interest rate. So huge shift. Like we had talked about in 18, 19, 2020, 2021, everybody's saying there's no inventory, hard to get inventory. And now all of a sudden, it's like, shoot, we had it good in 18, 19, 20, 21 because there was inventory. Now there's really no inventory. Now, when you talk to sellers and you listen to sellers and you're like, we go on multiple appointments every week where the seller's like, yep, selling my property. Let me know what you can offer me. Let me know what my house would list for. And then all of a sudden, they start looking for a property to move into, and they're like, oh, look, I didn't realize mortgage rates were 6. Mortgage rates are 7. I'm sorry, I can't move. So we've been in this environment now, 2022, 2023, 2024. Doesn't seem like there's big interest rate movement in sight. But like I said, as soon as you think that, then there's movement with everything. As soon as you think this is the environment that we're in forever, it changes because it just never remains the same exact environment. So the key to all this stuff, like throughout all of these shifts, right? Yeah. We're going from 2005 to 2025. My company has gone on, not in the very early stages, but probably since about 2012. Me and my team have gone on over 100 seller appointments a week. We buy about 2 to 3 properties per week. We list a few properties per week based on how we generate these leads. And we've done that no matter what the market has been. And yeah, we've had some years where we've done a lot better, some years where we've done worse, some years where it's been easier, some years where it's been harder, but we've always moved with the cheese. Now, we can't predict, like we know we're smart enough to know that like we can kind of guess at where the cheese is going to be moved. But we found out like everybody else the hard way, right? This market stuff is impossible to completely predict. I mean, even look at like the 2020 COVID year. Nobody would have predicted that. Nobody, right? Nobody would have predicted that, hey, we're going to have a pandemic. People are going to be locked down in their houses. Like nobody. And even with that being said, when it happened, everybody thought real estate prices were going to drop and then they went up, right? So just the predictability of where the cheese is going to move is the part that we don't like to kind of talk about. We speculate on it. We do guess at it, but we kind of know at the end of the day, we're not going to be accurate because we can't predict the future in many areas. Maybe in any areas, we can't really accurately predict the future. But what we can do is when we see the cheese is being moved, and we know, geez, it's not there anymore. What we do know for a fact, doing this for 20 years, is the answer is not to keep doing the same things that we were doing. The answer is to move to where the cheese is now. The question is always, where is the cheese now? How do you get seller appointments now? How do you get fix and flip opportunities? How do you get investment deals? Ultimately, how do you succeed as an agent investor? How do you build passive income? How do you help yourself, help your family? Um, and we talk about it all the time. We all have the same number of hours in a day. Yet some people, as I'm sitting here in the middle of 2025, are being really successful agent investors. And some people are like, shoot, I haven't had a listing, I haven't had a seller appointment in months, right? There's a reason. If you haven't had a seller appointment in months, if you haven't done a fix and flip in 6 months, if you haven't bought an investment property in a year or whatever, it's because you're either not doing anything or you're trying to do stuff that doesn't work anymore. So, um, if you do want to make these changes and you want to know what we're doing today, how we're generating over 100 seller appointments per week, where we've moved to, the strategies and techniques that work for us in the middle of 2025, I'm going to invite you guys all to come on my live call at www.partnerwithagentinvestor.com. That's www.partnerwithagentinvestor.com. On that call, which will be live, you can ask questions. We're going to give you guys all the information that you need to start shifting. So where the cheese is at today, we'll talk about where is the cheese today? What's working? What are the strategies? How do you become an agent investor? How do you generate an appointment a week or more? How do you then convert them into fix and flip opportunities? How can you potentially partner with us if you do get a deal? Or if you want to do a deal on your own, do the deal on your own. And then lastly, how do you then take those big chunks of income and then invest them in long-term passive assets so that you get paid each and every month? So none of what we do, like as I'm sitting here, as you guys are listening to me, none of what we do is magical. It's not special. It's just that we are always looking for the best practices and best ways to do things. It's that we believe that if you are willing and able to go out there and try some stuff and generate seller appointments, it's going to change your business. There is nothing more important as a real estate agent than getting a seller appointment, and especially as an agent investor. Ideally, you're going on at least 3, 4, 5, 6 seller appointments in a month. Not saying that it's super easy, but if you're not doing it, if you're not waking up every day being like, hey, I'm going to try to get a seller appointment today, as an agent, what are you doing? What are you focused on? Like that has to be your number one thing. And again, if you want to learn how we're doing all this stuff, go to www.partnerwithagentinvestor.com. www.partnerwithagentinvestor.com. We talk about it all the time. Eat that frog. Make sure that the stuff that we're teaching you in that weekly call is stuff that you're focused on every day. Even if it's for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes a day, make that be the start of your day. Stop waking up, answering emails, answering text messages, going out to coffee with your mortgage broker, talking to your attorney. Like focus on the 80-20, right? 20% of everything that you do, Pareto's principle, gets you 80% of all of your results in life. It's literally a scientific fact. Focus more on that 20% that is going to get you the big results in your business. If you haven't done that yet, if you haven't had success with any of this stuff, make sure that you jump on the call, because it might be because you don't know what to do, right? If you don't know what to do, that's perfectly acceptable, right? But if you do know what to do, putting into action, make sure that as the market shifts, and it's going to shift again, this is the big thing, right? As soon as we think mortgage rates are never going to go back down, all of a sudden there'll be 4% interest rates again. Like I said a few minutes ago, when that's going to be, I wouldn't even want to guess at, right? I would be lying to you if I said I knew, but I know it's going to happen. I know there's going to be another shift. I don't know when. It could be this year. It could be next year. But what you want to do right now, Again, that's why you want to jump on this call at www.partnerwithagentinvestor.com. What you want to do now is figure out what's working today. And as soon as it shifts, right, make sure that you're connected to us because we're going to be looking for ways to find that cheese, right? We're going to be certainly one of the first few companies that are going to be finding that cheese. We're going to be on the hunt for it. As soon as we find it, to our loyal agent investor listeners, we're going to share it with everybody. We've been doing that since day one. I built my business off of sharing, valuable information and people taking action. I've built my brokerage that way. I've built my agent partnership program that way, and I'm going to continue to do it. So guys, thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate you guys listening. Hey, keep on the lookout for that cheese. Jump on my next call at www.partnerwithagentinvestor.com. Thanks for tuning in.